You can, of course, use the Properties Inspector to modify and create CSS. It would be my recommendation, however, not to do this until you're fully comfortable with CSS. I'm going to go ahead and expand the CSS Designer so we can see more of the content inside of this panel. If you come over and select something, like place a blinking cursor inside of flowing water, you'll notice that we're dealing with the H2 element, and we know that we have an H2 selector. If we take a look at the selectors category, the H2 selector is not selected, but rather something called computed is. What is computed? Well, computed are all the properties assigned to this text. Remember, we redefined the appearance of the body, TD, and TH elements to control the overall appearance of the text within the page. Well, flowing water, this heading 2, falls within the overall text, so it automatically takes on those characteristics. It just so happens that we've also redefined the H2 element, and with that, we've changed other properties like the color, the font family, and the font size. So this is a computed value. If we come over to the CSS section in the Properties panel, you'll see the targeted rule right now is H2. Again, that makes sense because we have a blinking cursor within the H2 element. If you use this drop-down menu, you'll see the exact cascade. So you can see what that computed value ultimately is representing. It's representing the body, TD, and TH group selector, as well as the H2 selector. Now in this case, because we've essentially overridden all the properties associated with this body, TD, TH group selector, you're not really seeing any inheritance take place. Inheritance is simply taking on the characteristics of the first style. As we get more and more complicated with our content inside of Dreamweaver, you'll begin to see how these properties override and what the end result of that is. But in this case, H2 will override everything inside this selector because it deals with all the same properties. Nevertheless, at this point, because we have H2 as the targeted rule, here inside of the Properties panel, we can change some of the properties associated with that selector. What's nice about the Properties panel is if you hover over anything like the targeted rule, it will tell you that that rule is defined in the external style sheet file styles.css. If you hover over font, it will tell you that the property font family is inherited from the H2 rule. Likewise with the size. So if we come over here and change the color to something completely different, I'll go with this color here, you'll notice all the H2 elements are updated. And if we come over and highlight the H2 selector within the selectors category and come over to the text category, we can see that the color's been updated there as well. So you also have the ability to create new rules. If you place a blinking cursor inside of the document somewhere, for the targeted rule, you can always come over and choose New Rule. And when you choose New Rule, you're going to be creating something called an inline style, which is something that's frowned upon. If I come over here and change something like the color, I've essentially created a new inline style. So here I've selected the text looking. If I come over to the code view, in the code view, we can see we have some new markup. We have a span element, which is really nothing more than a placeholder element so we can add a style attribute. Inline styles like this really lead the way to sloppy code and makes it very difficult to manage and even override particular styles. So they're not really recommended, unless of course you're working with HTML content for email campaigns. There are some special circumstances where they would be considered acceptable, but this certainly is not one of them. So I don't really want to do that, so I'm going to go ahead and remove class, and it should revert back to the gray. If it doesn't, you want to make sure that you choose remove class. I already did. It doesn't seem to be working. I'm just going to come into the code view. Here inside the code view, I'm just going to manually get rid of that span element to remove it. So hopefully that gives you some indication as to how you can work with the Properties panel when it comes to working with CSS. One thing that I will point out, for those of you working with Dreamweaver CC right now as it just came out, there are two buttons here. One is called Edit Rule. If you click Edit Rule, of course you need to have a rule selected, so I'm going to come over here and select one of the rules. If you click Edit Rule, it's going to open up this definition dialog box. Now, if you've upgraded from previous versions of Dreamweaver, you're going to recognize this dialog box, but basically it's a dialog box that displays all the information that's available inside the CSS Designer. It's just in dialog box format. It's my expectation that this will go away, as Adobe's been trying to eliminate this dialog box and really replace its functionality with the CSS designer. So depending upon what version of Dreamweaver CC you have would ultimately dictate if this dialog box is available. But it certainly works. If you want to make a change, you can come over here and make that change. When you click apply, you can see the changes take place. So you certainly can use this dialog box. The other option in the Properties panel is to click CSS panel. What that will do is open up the CSS designer if it's not currently open. In this case, it is currently open, so it doesn't do anything. But if your CSS designer panel was not open, it would automatically open it for you, giving you the ability to use the CSS designer to make any modifications or changes.